Hey everybody, my name is Lyle and welcome to the channel. So somebody has suggested I do a video on Mount Washington and why it's so deadly. Now, to be honest, I had to Google where Mount Washington was. It's in New Hampshire. So let's jump in. Let's have a look at this. Why so many die on this small mountain? Okay.
Mount Washington at 6,288 feet or 1,917 meters tall in a
I think the highest mountain we have in Queensland is about, I think it's just over 5,000, something like that. So this one's slightly taller than that. All right. So it's not a very big mountain.
6,288 feet or 1,917 meters tall in a country home to the Rockies, the Sierras, and the Alaskan Giants. It's almost difficult to even call it a mountain. But Mount Washington is deceptive. In fact, it's no exaggeration to say that Mount Washington experiences some of the worst conditions, not just in the US, but anywhere on Earth. It's for this reason that it actually has the record for the most fatalities per vertical foot of any mountain on the planet. These are the disturbing incidents of the most dangerous small mountain in the United States. As always, viewer discretion is advised.
Okay.
Mount Washington, located in the presidential range of the White Mountains in New Hampshire, doesn't look like a killer. At just 6,288 feet, or 1,917 meters tall, it barely clears what many people would even call a mountain, at least in parts of the country that boast the Rockies, the Sierras, and the Alaskan Giants. By all appearances, Mount Washington looks like a manageable day trip, a big hill you can knock up before lunch and still be back in time for a meal somewhere in quaint, cozy New Hampshire. But as the saying goes, appearances can be deceiving. Since 1849, Mount Washington has racked up a body count that seems abnormally high for its seemingly unimpressive conditions. With more than 160 known fatalities and hundreds of rescues every decade, Mount Washington is actually so deceptively dangerous that it holds the title of the mountain with the most deaths per vertical foot in the world. This is even stranger when you consider—
What the hell? 160?
Mountain with the most deaths per vertical foot in the world.
What the
This
hell?
is even stranger when you consider that at the summit, there are several buildings and a tourist information desk, all seeming so harmless. And yet, not far from the tourist information desk, there's a framed poster that quietly hints the danger. It's a list titled Casualties of Mount Washington, with names stretching back almost 2 centuries.
Wow.
The truth is, Mount Washington's danger clearly isn't in its height. Instead, it's due to the conditions on it.
Okay.
The weather on it has been called the worst in the world, and that's actually not an exaggeration. Winds of more than 230 miles per hour or 370 kilometers per hour have been clocked.
Oh my God. 230 miles an hour? What do you say that? It's 370? Oh my God. That's crazy.
Winds of more than 230 miles per hour or 370 kilometers per hour have been clocked at the summit. For context, that's just shy of the speeds of an F5 category tornado. These hurricane-force gusts also blast the peak more than 100 days a year, and temperatures plummet to levels that will freeze your skin solid in minutes. Even on a sunny, warm day at the base, conditions at the top can turn into a whiteout blizzard so fast that by the time you realize you're in trouble, it's already too late. And as a result, every year, Mount Washington lures in new victims. Some confident, some clueless, all of them unprepared for the merciless swings. Some die just a few feet from shelter, others vanish into the snow or slip off hidden cliffs. And a few of these make headlines, but most don't, and together they've earned Mount Washington a fearsome reputation as the deadliest small mountain in America. Long before it earned this distinction, though, Mount Washington was a place of awe, mystery, and deep respect. The indigenous Abenaki people knew it as Agiokochuk, or home of the Great Spirit, and believed the summit was so sacred that it should never be climbed. They spoke of powerful spirits who dwelled at the top, where the clouds kissed the stones and the winds howled with otherworldly force. Because even long before Europeans ever set foot on the continent, the mountain's deadly temperament was legend. The first European to record seeing it was an Italian explorer named Giovanni di Verrazzano, who spotted the white-topped peak from the Atlantic Ocean in 1524 and noted it in his journals. It wouldn't be until the mid-1600s, though, that settlers began pushing into the region, bringing their own names and ambitions.
By the 1700s, English colonists had christened it Mount Washington in honor of George Washington, decades before he would become the nation's first president.
In 1642, Darby Field—
Wait. how famous was George Washington before that? Oh, huh?
Washington, decades before he would become the nation's first president.
Okay.
In 1642, Darby Field, an Englishman living in New Hampshire, made the first recorded European ascent. At least he claimed to have climbed the summit.
This was something that wasn't fully believed at the time.
But either way, Darby's tales of the fierce winds and barren rock only fueled the mountain's mystique. Then, as the 19th century dawned, it transitioned from a myth to a magnet, and it became a proving ground for the bold and the curious. By the mid-1800s...
see, that's the thing. When you say, oh, you shouldn't do this, it's gonna kill you, you can't climb it, people are like, oh, yeah, okay, let me go and try it. It happens every bloody time. All the time.
Myth to a magnet, and it became a proving ground for the bold and the curious. By the mid-1800s, the mountain had become a destination for rugged adventurers and early tourists alike. As a result of this popularity, in 1852, the Tip Top House, a small stone hotel, was built at the summit to accommodate visitors, and then a few years later, the first road, and then the Cog Railway, which was the world's first mountain climbing cog railway. But this accessibility came at a cost.
Okay.
As the streams of visitors grew, so did the casualties. Even as technology advanced with better gear, better forecasts, and better rescue operations, it retained its deadly reputation. Even today, it's sort of an uneasy paradox. It's a historic monument, a natural wonder, and a training ground for mountaineers, but simultaneously a graveyard. Before we get into the stories that have occurred on the mountain, though, what exactly makes Mount Washington so dangerous is worthy of a bit more context. And it starts with the worst weather in the world. And this is not some dramatic tourist sports slogan either, it's been scientifically proven. Back in 1934, the Mount Washington Observatory clocked wind speeds at a staggering 231 miles per hour, which is strong enough to literally pull the boots off your feet. This record still holds as the highest non-tornado wind speed ever measured, and the cold doesn't play around either. Temperatures have plummeted to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 45.5 Celsius, and when you factor in the wind chill, it can feel like minus 100 Fahrenheit or minus 73 Celsius.
That's it. I'm out. I'm out. It's cold for me in Queensland when it's 65, under 20 degrees Celsius. Minus 70? Nah, that's it. I'm out. Sorry, mate. Nah, you're doing that yourself, I think. That's crazy.
It also snows so hard and so often that even in July, you might find yourself trudging through snowdrifts up to your hips.
Jeez.
The mountain also averages 280 inches or 711 centimeters of snow a year, and thanks to the endless howling wind, that snow blows into drifts 10 to 40 feet or 3 to 12 meters deep in some places. As you might imagine, this completely covers landmarks and trail markers, and the whiteout conditions are about as bad as it gets. And hikes up Mount Washington are more difficult than you'd expect from its size too. Every route, no matter how popular, involves a fairly brutal climb. Many start near sea level and climb to more than 4,000 feet or 1,200 meters in just a handful of miles. And in fact, one particular route, the Tuckerman Ravine route, actually works out to be a steeper gain per mile than Denali's famous West Buttress route. And then once you break above the tree line at around 4,400 feet, you're completely exposed. There are no trees to block the wind and no real shelter until the very top, just endless rocks and the occasional sheer drop. The average hike time is also about 8 hours, and that's assuming you don't get blown off course, cramp up, run out of daylight, or have to even find the trail because it was erased by snow. Maybe worst of all, though, is that Mount Washington just feels accessible. It's right there, just a few hours from Boston. You can drive to it, you can even ride a train to the summit, take a selfie, and grab a cup of hot chocolate at the gift shop. It looks tame and can even feel tame, but obviously this is deceptive. The mountain claimed its
it's got a bloody train and a roadway to the top. You just think, yeah, whatever, we'll walk it. No worries. That's crazy. That is crazy
tame
mountain.
And can even feel tame, but obviously this is deceptive. The mountain claimed its first recorded victim in October of 1849. Frederick Strickland, a 29-year-old Englishman, was determined to conquer Mount Washington despite winter-like conditions. He would end up reaching the summit, but it was on the descent that disaster struck. Strickland lost the trail somewhere in the dense wilderness of a ravine where the clouds and wind erased any landmarks. Then alone, disoriented, and battered by the elements, he wandered until his strength gave out. His body was later found frozen solid in the bed of a river. 6 years later, the mountain claimed a second notable victim, and its first woman. Lizzie Bourne was just 23 years old, and despite a pre-existing heart condition and heavy Victorian clothing that would have made movement difficult even in good weather, Lizzie set off with her uncle and cousin, aiming to see the next morning sunrise from the summit's famed tip-top house. As the afternoon wore on, though, the weather deteriorated. Cold, wet winds tore at their clothes, and clouds obscured the trailhead. Soon enough, with the night closing in and the trail invisible, the group built a crude stone shelter against the wind and huddled for warmth. By morning, however, Lizzie had succumbed to the cold and died of hypothermia. And tragically, in a cruel twist of fate, when the fog lifted, Tip Top House stood just a few hundred feet away. It was so close, they probably could have crawled to it had they had known. But despite this well-documented history, Mount Washington keeps claiming victims to this day. On the morning of June 17, 2024, Jesse texted his longtime friend and neighbor, Dennis, to share his excitement. At 53, Jesse was an experienced hiker who had fallen in love with New Hampshire's White Mountains after moving to Massachusetts in the late 1990s. Many weekends found him venturing north from his home in Andover, sometimes with his wife and their 3 children, but often with his teenage son, who shared his father's stamina for strenuous multi-day climbs. Then, even when he wasn't hiking, he was preparing for it, following outdoor YouTubers, researching the latest ultralight gear, and updating his list of dream climbs, including Mount Kilimanjaro. In his kitchen, he even had a map of New Hampshire's 4,000-foot peaks, and by June of 2024, he had already conquered 21 of them.
Wow.
That weekend as well, Jesse aimed to tackle one of the most storied and grueling routes in the White Mountains, something known as the Presidential Traverse. This is 20 miles or 32 kilometers across 7 exposed 4,000-foot peaks, including Madison, Adams, Jefferson, Washington, Monroe, Eisenhower, and Pierce. And he had hoped to share this trek with his son, but when his son couldn't get away from school, he decided to go solo. Around 9 a.m. that morning, he texted a photo of his pack.
His son's probably lucky he couldn't get out of school. Probably lucky. Maybe it would have turned out different if both of them were there. Who knows? But I guess we'll never know. But dang.
Get away from school, he decided to go solo.
Dang.
Around 9 a.m. that morning, he texted a photo of his packed gear to Dennis, smiling with anticipation. Then by Friday night, Jesse was at a tent site nestled in a quiet grove of hardwoods near the base of Mount Madison. He then sent a short drone video to his family capturing the surrounding wilderness. Early Saturday morning, Jesse set out on his path, and skies were overcast but manageable at first. As he climbed Mount Madison, though, and snapped a series of selfies from its summit, the weather worsened. Gray skies turned to steady rain, the peaks became hidden behind clouds, and wind tugged at his jacket hood. But still, Jesse pressed onward over the rocky summits of Adams and Jefferson. This is where things took a horrifying turn. At 2:50 p.m., he texted his wife, quote, "Got wet 3 miles from any civilization, a bit concerned about hypothermia." He then also added a request for her to watch his phone's tracking location. Then at 4:26 p.m., another text read, quote, "Heading to Mount Washington or Lake in the Clouds hut." By this point, the weather was collapsing faster than either of them realized. Up at the summit, winds roared to 80 miles per hour or 129 kilometers per hour, and temperatures nosedived. Sleet and snow also fell over the exposed ridgelines, and the wind chill dipped to -5 degrees Fahrenheit or -21 degrees Celsius.
That's cold.
This is an unthinkable danger for anyone, much less a soaked and isolated hiker. Then just an hour later, at 5:30 p.m., Jesse sent a gut-wrenching text, quote, "In trouble, can't move."
Imagine getting that text at home and not being able to do it. Oh my God, that is heartbreaking. In trouble, can't move. I mean, what are you supposed to do? I know, obviously, call rescue and stuff, but I can't imagine.
At 5:30 p.m., Jesse sent a gut-wrenching text, quote, "In trouble, can't move." His wife then immediately asked if she should call for rescue, and Jesse simply replied, quote, "Yes, could die." She then called 911, only to be told that rescuers needed a precise location before they could launch a mission. Afterward, his wife frantically tried to guide authorities using his last known coordinates from Jesse's phone, and their son helped pinpoint the longitude and latitude using satellite imagery. As this was going on, as they scrambled to coordinate help, his wife sent more messages asking if he was awake, and for a time, there was no reply. Then finally, there was another message from Jesse, quote, "I'm lost, need help." This would be his final communication. Lieutenant Mark of New Hampshire Fish and Game received the report at 6:34 p.m. Rescue crews then loaded up a truck with tire chains and fought their way up the ice-glazed Mount Washington Auto Road. 4 hours later, at 10:38 p.m., after hours of brutal searching, the first team found Jesse lying on the Gulfside Trail near Mount Clay, and he was unresponsive and deep into hypothermia. They then constructed a makeshift shelter to shield him from the storm and tried desperately to rewarm him. He was then evacuated back to the base of the mountain, and from there, he was rushed to the hospital, but despite every effort, Jesse couldn't be saved. He was pronounced dead after several hours of attempted resuscitation. He had been less than a mile from the Lake of the Clouds hut, where he likely would have been safe. In the aftermath, understandably, Jesse's death sent shockwaves through his family and the hiking community that admired him. He wasn't some reckless adventurer or thrill seeker unprepared for the mountains. He was thoughtful, experienced, prepared, and still, he died anyway. And just 2 months later, Mount Washington struck again. In August 2024, a 72-year-old man decided to...
That is heartbreaking. To get those texts, oh man, that would just devastating. Absolutely bloody devastating to know you couldn't do anything.
Mount Washington struck again. In August 2024, a 72-year-old man decided to take the cog railway up to the summit and then hike down under his own power.
72?
This is a fairly common thing for tourists of the mountain, and it was a decision that seemed harmless at the time and should have been harmless. Again, this was August, so the man was dressed only in jeans, a thin raincoat, and hiking boots. As he descended, though, the rain turned to sleet and the fog thickened and the summit's mild winds grew stronger. And worst of all, temperatures then plummeted to below freezing with the wind chill. A fellow hiker found his body the next day, sprawled along the Gulfside Trail, just half a mile from the summit. Close enough that he might have survived had he turned back sooner, or maybe he was already on his way back. Several months earlier, in March of 2024, two hikers were attempting to ski down the Tuckerman Ravine after a hard-earned climb up Left Gully. The snowpack, though, weakened by a week of warm temperatures and then flash frozen under new ice, had turned the slope into a death trap. Both hikers seemed to have slipped simultaneously, or the snow gave way and the two went into an uncontrolled slide, 600 vertical feet or 183 meters over hard snow, sharp rocks, and hidden crevasses. One of them was killed instantly in the slide. Then, just minutes later, in a tragic coincidence, another hiker fell in nearby Hillman's Highway and suffered critical injuries. And then there's Sarah, who didn't slip or get lost. In June of 1994, after finishing a skiing run on the head wall of Tuckerman Ravine, Sarah was making her way down when the mountain dropped a 15-ton chunk of ice on her. Falling ice in Tuckerman Ravine isn't a rare event, especially in late spring.
Oh my God.
Ton chunk of ice on her. Falling ice in Tuckerman Ravine isn't a rare event, especially in late spring and early summer, and on that day, warnings had already been issued for unusually dangerous conditions. And so, several massive ice blocks broke free from the headwall, some big enough to crush entire groups of climbers. Sarah never stood a chance. A single erratic piece of falling ice struck her down in an instant. Avalanches, too, are a regular occurrence on the mountain. In April of 2019, a 32-year-old skier ventured alone into the Raymond's Cataract area northeast of Tuckerman Ravine. This is a known avalanche risk zone, and sometime that day, a slide buried him under feet of compacted snow. By the time search and rescue teams found him after an exhausting 90-minute dig, he was in cardiac arrest, and despite every effort to save his life, he was pronounced dead. Not every incident comes with a thunderous fall or a dramatic rescue attempt, though. Sometimes it's just quiet, creeping exhaustion. In June of 1933, Simon Joseph, who was just 19 years old, set off with friends toward the Lake of the Clouds hut without food in miserable weather. Rain and cold battered the teenagers as they ascended, and the group eventually drifted apart, weakened by hunger and fatigue. Simon then accidentally veered off the trail into the mist, missing a critical turn. A massive search was launched, but quickly hampered by dense fog and dangerous winds. Days later, his body was found heartbreakingly close to the hut. If he had kept to the path, he might have lived. And in fact, even those whose job it is to save others aren't safe from Mount Washington. Albert Dow, a volunteer with the Mountain Rescue Service, set out to find two missing climbers in January of 1982. The teenagers were trapped somewhere in the upper portion, and avalanche warnings were issued and the mountain was raging. Visibility was also almost zero, and yet still, Albert and his team climbed. Albert, however, would never make it back. On the descent, he and a fellow rescuer were caught in an avalanche near Lionhead. Albert was found 2 hours later, buried under 3 feet of heavy snow. He became the first and still the only Mount Washington rescue volunteer to die during an active mission. And the climbers he was trying to save ended up badly frostbitten but alive. So you can look at Mount Washington's record and start to wonder, how does a mountain barely taller than a Denver suburb keep killing people like this? And the answer is clearly that it's a combination of ice and wind, but it's also in its deceptive appearance and the popularity. It doesn't look like a death trap, and it doesn't feel like one either. The mountain is easy to get to. It doesn't require a 2-week expedition hauling gear up glaciers. There are no bush planes, no yaks, and no oxygen masks. You can drive to the trailhead in an SUV and be standing on a summit-bound trail by mid-morning. And if you're feeling really casual, you can literally take a train or drive your car up to the top and buy a bumper sticker that says you did. It all feels manageable, touristy even, and that's exactly the trap. People see the paved road and the gift shop at the summit and think, how bad could it possibly be? They see the blue skies at the base and assume the weather will hold. It doesn't need to be storming when you start, and it doesn't need to look dangerous when you lace up your boots. But even for the experienced, the mountain is still obviously dangerous. He had climbed dozens of peaks across New Hampshire, he knew the White Mountains, he was strong and capable, and still Mount Washington took him down. The same thing happens again and again. Hikers underestimate the weather, or overestimate their speed, or trust forecasts that can change in minutes. Taking a look at the statistics, between 1928 and 2024, the leading cause of death by a wide margin has been what's been termed long sliding falls, which make up more than 45% of deaths during that time period. Just behind that, hypothermia and avalanches are tied for second at 20%. Issues like exposure, falling ice, and crevasses are also represented on the list. And one of the more common causes of death on Mount Washington is actually heart attack, with at least 23 being recorded.
Ooh.
All in all, Mount Washington doesn't look like some of the other dangerous mountains on the channel like Mount Everest or K2. It stands there unassuming and framed by blue skies. It's a mountain that doesn't just kill in raging blizzards or howling whiteouts, although it's more than capable of both. It kills on sunny afternoons under skies so clear you can see the Atlantic Ocean shimmering miles away. It kills when you're 1 mile from a hut, a few hundred feet from a shelter, or when you're already texting your family that you'll be fine. Its victims are almost never cartoonishly reckless. They're just people like Jesse who are thoughtful, methodical, and prepared. They're tourists who decide to stretch their legs after a ride up the Cog Railway, and they're hikers who packed all the right gear but couldn't outrun a freak storm, a wrong step, or a sudden slide. It doesn't look like the sort of place where your story ends, and that illusion is why Mount Washington continues to claim lives year after year in rain, in snow, in broad daylight, and under cheerful skies. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it to the forum found in the description. Also, if you want to support the channel, consider joining the Patreon or becoming a channel member here on YouTube. Anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.
I gotta tell you, that was a very interesting video. I've never really heard of Mount Washington. As I said, I had to Google where it was. It looks very unassuming, 6,000 meters tall, 6,000 feet tall, I should say. But as I said, that's the problem, because people can get to the top of it via the rail car, or you can just drive up in your own car. But it's that way that it turns so quickly as well too. Or you could just be perfectly fine, you're hiking pretty good, and then the mountain gives way and you're in an avalanche. It's like, holy moly, that's pretty scary. That's a pretty scary mountain. So that poor Jesse as well, you get to the end of that story and it's just like, oh, he's so close as well. So close as well. But that's what they always say, if it wasn't dangerous, people wouldn't do it, but people do it because, they're drawn to it. They like that danger. They like that challenge as well. And that's definitely a challenge. Mount Washington in New Hampshire. What a crazy weather system. It just must be in that area where everything just comes together to, as they say, that perfect storm and whatever else. The wind speed up there, the 231 miles, that's crazy. That is 370 Ks an hour. Man, that is mental. That is mental. So that's just one more reason why I don't do mountain climbing. That's crazy. That is I don't know, yeah. That's kind of unassuming, but don't take it on its appearance alone, It could be very deadly. So very interesting video. Let me know if you enjoyed that one, guys. Thank you very much for joining me. Make sure you stay safe, and I will definitely see you in the next reaction video. Oh, you're still here? You want more content? Why don't you check out my Patreon down here? You'll get plenty more content and some exclusive videos over there too. If not, why not check out this one over here?